Our talk on the Enneagram with Sarajane Case. My name is John Banter, and I work with the Office of Leadership and Community Engagement here at Georgia Southern University. I'm so happy to have you all in our normal time when we would have speakers come face to face to speak to us on campus, our new world where we join everybody virtually. We are able to do this event, but also have people gathered from all over to hear this talk. So it is kind of an unusual thing for us, but a great experiment that we can have Sarajane join us tonight to talk to us. And her talk is talking about the finding your inner leader, the Enneagram and leadership. And Sarajane is an author, a speaker, podcaster, and now YouTuber based out of Asheville, North Carolina. She's been featured in publications like Apartment Therapy, The Everyday Girl, Parade Magazine, and was named a 2018 Person on the Rise by Honeybook. With an Instagram account of over 500,000 followers, she regularly stays at the top of the charts in self-help, and she has a book that just launched in April of 2020. So she's a rising star in the area of personal development. You can find more from her on her Instagram account, which is Enneagram and Coffee, her podcast, Enneagram and Coffee, and it can be found on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Her website, enneagramandcoffee.com, is also another great resource that has a lot of different Enneagram-related topics. And you can also check out her brand new book, The Honest Enneagram, and she'll talk a little bit about that tonight. And it's available wherever books are sold. So we were kind of introduced to Sarajane from some of our alumni now, but students that was really just on fire about the Enneagram. We didn't really know a whole lot about it, but we discovered it through Sarajane, and now we are happy to have her here with us tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to her to share about the Enneagram and leadership. Take it away, Sarajane.
I like to think of these as who we think we have to be in order to be okay. So we're going to look at the system itself, and I'll kind of run through it for you just so we have kind of the lay of the land. We're not going to go into as much detail for our talk today because again, I want to make sure we're covering the leadership aspect for each type, but there is so much depth, so much complexity to learn with the system itself. So I just want to make sure you have kind of a grasp for the system. So right here we have the circle of numbers. So these are the 9 distinct types. You'll notice that between each type, there's a 1W, or the number W, another number, and that is your wing. So beside each number is a wing. This is really just a flavoring of your type. Your dominant type, let's say you're a dominant type 1, that is your type structure. That is your motivation. That's what drives you. And then you have access to behavior patterns and thought patterns of 2 and 9. And just like any number on the Enneagram, the 2 on the other side of you can pull from those 2 numbers as well. So it's kind of like a flavoring. Some people pull from both numbers. Some people really lean into one or the other, and others don't pull from either of them. So that's just something to be aware of. The other thing to know is you'll notice that there are 2 lines going to and from each type. These are your stress and rest lines. So let's use type 1 as an example again. A type 1 who is really feeling relaxed, at ease, safe, and comfortable is going to show up over here like a type 7. So they might become a little bit more like a 7, which we'll get into what that looks like in a minute. And then our type 1s who feel stressed out or who are going through a hard time, they're going to move down here to type 4. And that's going to look a little bit like the lower level of type 4. And again, that's something to really go into. We're not going to cover that today just because that for time's sake, but I want you to be aware of kind of how the system is oriented so you have that grasp. So when you understand your number, you'll start to see kind of where you play in the system. And I will run through each of these types real quick, and I like to use the description of who you think you have to be in order to be safe, loved, accepted, okay. So type 1s believe they have to be a good person. Type 2s believe they have to be helpful or lovable. Type 3s believe they have to be successful. Type 4s believe they have to be significant. Type 5s believe they have to be informed and capable. Type 6 believe they have to be safe and loyal. Type 7s believe they have to be happy and free. Type 8s believe they have to be in control or in charge. And type 9s believe they have to be at peace or at ease or easy to get along with. Okay, so we're going to break down each type in detail. I'm going to talk about basic fear, basic desire, a little bit about what that type is, and then we're going to go into the leadership qualities of each one. At the end, I'm going to stay for questions. So if you have questions about the system in general, about your particular number, about kind of a clarification of anything that I say, don't hesitate to kind of take a note and ask me at the end, because I'll stay and hang out and answer your questions. Okay, so let's talk about our type ones. The basic desire for our type ones is to be a good person, to have balance, and to live in integrity. The basic fear is of being corrupt or evil. Type ones typically are disciplined, discerning, and judicious. They're hardworking, honest. They're refining, organized structure. And I like to say, likely the best person you know. What I mean by that is they're putting a lot of their attention and their time into being a good person. Their focus of attention is just doing the right thing. So the titles that often get applied to type one are perfectionist or the reformer. And I'm slow to use the perfectionist title. I'm actually a bigger fan of the reformer title. And here's why: because most type ones, their focus of attention tends to go toward what could be improved. And so, yes, that can look like perfectionism, but I would say most type ones are aware that perfectionism, being a perfectionist, is not perfect, and therefore would work on that. So they would a lot of types of ones don't relate to the perfectionist title. And the other element too is that type ones never really quite feel like they hit that perfectionist mark, and there's always more to be improved. So kind of associating with that perfectionist title can be difficult for someone's. So reformer is the term that I prefer. So let's talk about leadership in type ones. The first thing we're going to talk about here is what you might be naturally capable of doing, what you kind of already probably do. So for our type ones, that's an example of integrity and thoroughness. Type ones are, again, they're looking for how things can always be improved. They're not looking for shortcuts. They're not looking for ways to do the least. They're trying to do the best and make things as best as they can be. And so the type ones in our lives often show up like, oh, sorry, I clicked on the chat and then can't get it unclicked. Okay, there we go. Okay, so our type ones, yeah, they show up like wanting to be a good person, wanting to do the right thing. And so they're often an example of what it looks like to live in integrity and to get things done the best way possible. The things that our type ones need to pay attention to that might come up as you step into leadership in your life are, first, constantly refining can limit your ability to make impact. So if we're constantly looking for ways that we can improve things, there's almost the sense that something's never done. And so we have to figure out ahead of time, what does complete look like, so that I can actually make the impact that I want to make in the world and in the people around the people around me, so that I'm actually getting things done, getting things out there, not just kind of constantly perfecting and refining. Just like if you're I'm going to use building a website as an example, because that's the world that I live in. But let's say, or you're writing a paper and you're constantly editing along the way, or you're constantly, you never quite feel finished and you can't turn that paper in, you're still going to get a 0, right? You have to eventually be done. It's got to be like good enough and get it out the door. The second thing is embrace different perspectives and ways of doing things. So when a type 1 steps into a leadership role, sometimes there's this inner authority that can occur. Our type 1s have a pretty strong sense of right and wrong, and a pretty strong sense of the best way that the way things should be done. And so a lot of the work is around allowing the people who you are leading to also impact you, right? You're a really great example of the best, like a really good way to get things done, the right way to get things done in theory. But you might learn something from them as well if you open yourself up to their opinions and their way of doing things. A lot of times Type ones who've been doing this work for a little while, they talk about asking more questions instead of giving more answers. So when someone says, I want to do it this way, instead of saying, no, I need you to do it my way, stop, pause, and say, what is it about that way that feels good to you? Because you might be surprised at their kind of thought process behind it. And then our burnout prevention. So, type one said this to me, and I will hold on to it forever, and it is excellent over perfect. So, when we get into that refining space, right, when we start to think about constantly improving, constantly making something better, there's not an end to that work, right? There's always a way something could be improved. And so the work really has to be, how can I consider something as excellent and not as perfect? So again, it gets out the door, but it doesn't have to be, it will never be complete. And so it just has to be good enough. So let me know in the comments if you have questions about type one specifically. And if I can answer it, I will right now. Otherwise, I'll answer it at the end. Okay, awesome. I'm going to move on to type two, and then yeah, we'll keep going. All right, so type twos, the common titles for type two are the helper, and the basic desire here is to be loved and liked. The basic fear is of not being loved for who they are. Type twos are helpful, generous, warm, and loving. They're considerate, patient, gracious, forgiving, and likely the person who has made you feel the most loved in your life. I like to think of twos as like warm homes in human form. Like you feel so safe when around most type twos. Like they just envelop you in love, and they're outreaching, right? Like they kind of pull you in, and there's something really comforting about that. Leadership in type twos is type twos are a perfect example of servant leadership and consideration. Type twos are walking into a room and they're looking for the unmet needs that are in that space. So when they're a leader and they step into a space as a leader, they're going to be that servant leader who steps in, who takes care of their people, and then also is aware of how they're impacting others. They kind of operate naturally with a sense of, how can I be of service to you? And how can I make sure that you feel good and you're happy here? That is kind of their natural zone of genius. Now, things to pay attention to here is making sure that you're not giving with hopes of receiving. Sometimes our type twos get caught up in this really impossible game of, I want to give to you, I want to give, and I have so much to give. And then one day they realize that no one's giving back. And that can lead to a lot of resentment, and that can lead to a lot of frustration. And so, to make sure that when you are giving, because you can be so generous, that you're actually giving without strings attached. And sometimes that may mean you give a little less. So maybe you give only when you know it's clean and clear and there are no expectations, and then you don't give when you feel like, you know what, if I did this and I didn't get an immediate thank you and an immediate reciprocation, then I probably shouldn't give right now. A second thing to pay attention to is that you're communicating your needs out loud. Twos have this incredible ability to read a room, anticipate the needs of other people, and meet those needs without anyone saying a word. And the problem that can come up with this is that other people aren't doing that. And I think this is one of the greatest gifts of the Enneagram to our type twos, is the realization that other people aren't doing that. They're not just, because I think when you think other people are looking at the world the way that you're looking at the world, it can feel as if people are just ignoring your needs. Like they see them, they're like bright blinging lights at them, and they're just not paying attention. They just don't care. And that's not it at all. They just don't know. So a lot of the work for type twos is learning to speak out loud what it is that you want and need. The burnout prevention here for our type twos is pay attention to your own needs and make a point to meet them daily. Our type twos have kind of a blindness to their own needs. So it's kind of like the cobbler's kid's shoes, right? Is that the phrase? Like you take care of everybody else, but you neglect your own needs. And it's almost like you don't even realize you have needs. It's like, well, they have needs, I don't have needs, so I'll take care of them. And the reality is, every single day you have a need. Every single day you have something that is going to be you're going to need something. And so I recommend to most type 2s that you check in every single day with what is your heart, your soul, your mind, and your body, what do they need that day, and then make a plan to meet those needs. Because when you walk out into the world with a bunch of unmet needs, and then from there you give and you give and you give, and no one says thank you, no one's anticipating your needs, that's a really quick and easy path to burnout. So you really have to make sure that you are being the person that you need right now for yourself, and that every bit of giving that you do is coming from your overflow and not your lack. Okay, so move on to type 3. So type 3s are the achiever on the Enneagram. Their basic desire is to be accepted and viewed as worthwhile. Their basic fear is that they are only as worthy as their achievements. Type 3s are driven, motivated, and goal-oriented. They are inspiring, accomplished, capable, productive, and likely the person who makes you want to do more, be more, and dream bigger. This is like the goal-oriented number. Like they are focused on like, where are we going? What are we going to achieve? I'm on to the next thing. I'm climbing the ladder. I'm climbing the mountain. We're getting to the next peak. Leadership in type 3s, like kind of the natural zone of genius here, is that they're an example of what it looks like to go all in on your goals. Like our type 3s, like they are not afraid to go full on toward the things that they want in their life. And that can be really inspiring to be around. That can encourage us to feel like we can do the same. Things to pay attention to for our type 3s is neglecting life satisfaction in favor of achievement. So we talked about getting to that next mountain peak. What can happen here though is you get to the top of the mountain, you've grueled your way up there, right? Like you've pulled long hours, you've worked late into the night, you've like neglected your basic needs, I mean, you're exhausted and you feel frustrated, but you got to the top of the mountain, and getting to the top of the mountain, like that feels good, right? So you get to the top of the mountain, and then you look around, and instead of celebrating, you look around and you notice there's actually another mountain like off in the distance, and it needs to be climbed too. So you pull the same long hours, the same neglecting of your own needs, the same kind of like over perspiration to get to the top of the second mountain peak. And then guess what happens when you get there? There's just another one to climb. And if we're not careful, our type 3s can spend their entire lives just in most of their life in that grueling climb state, and not a lot of their life in the full on satisfaction of enjoying the process. So the work is really in making sure that you're not just achieving your goals, but that you're also enjoying the journey along the way. The second thing that can happen for our type 3s in a similar note is not taking time off. So making sure that you actually are resting incrementally will help so much. Most of our type 3s, they get into this kind of roller coaster energy state where they go really, really, really hard, and they work really hard, and then they crash. And this crash for most of the type 3s in my life looks like days of watching Netflix, days of just kind of like binging out, closing out the world, hermiting up. And this is really kind of counter to the way that they typically show up in their life, which is like very driven, very goal oriented. And so the hard part of this is that dip, they didn't prepare for it, right? They're used to having so much energy, so much enthusiasm. So when that dip happens, a couple of things can occur. They might start to drop their balls on things that they didn't plan to not have the energy they normally have. And they may start to feel guilty or shame ridden for feeling like they're not producing what they normally produce. Because remember, our Enneagram type is what we think we have to be in order to be accepted and loved and okay. And so if we think I have to achieve, I have to succeed, and then I'm in a season where I can't do that, then a lot of my self-worth is going to kind of hit the pits. So the work here is really in integrating self-care regularly, integrating rest on a regular or incremental basis, so that you can actually like miss the things that you're working toward, miss the goals that you have, so that you can come in with consistent fervor and not just kind of that high and then the low. Now, our burnout prevention here for our 3s is to set your goals based off of how you want to feel, not what you want to achieve. So the whole the gold star thing, that's easy, right? Like, okay, I'm going to get to the next level. I'm going to work on the next project. That stuff's easy. But what you need to do is make sure that you're setting goals around how you feel in your life. So I want to feel rested. I want to feel confident. I want to feel at ease. And so what goals can I set that will help me to feel the way I want to feel? And that's going to help you so much, because it doesn't mean you don't climb the mountaintops, right? You still climb the mountaintops. You just enjoy the journey instead of kind of grueling and getting to the top in the worst possible ways. All right, so that's our type threes. I know I'm running through these kind of fast, so please, I'm going to hang out. I'm going to answer your questions. I swear it. All right, type four. So our type fours on the Enneagram, they get called the romantic, they get called the individualist. I, in my book, call them meaning makers, because I think that they're the type that demands depth and complexity from us all. The basic desire for our fours is to find and share an identity that expresses their significance. And the basic fear is that they themselves are not significant. So they've built their whole life around proving to themselves that they are significant. Type fours are deep, expressive, and nostalgic. They are emotionally in tune, aesthetically gifted, authentic. They're romantic, idealistic, and they have this beautiful ability to see the world as living art. So leadership in our type fours, where we are like, type fours are naturally gifted, is that they're a really good example of not shying away from the full human experience. What I mean by that is, like, they see their sadness, they see their joy, they see their anger, and they're like, yeah, all of that's here, all of that's okay. And we are like more than okay to experience all of that in its fullness. A lot of times fours, I think inappropriately, get coined with the idea of melancholy. And I'm not the biggest fan of that, because I think it's less about just indulging their sadness and more about like feeling everything honestly and deeply and expressing that outwardly. So a lot of great fours in the world are people who have experienced life, lived it richly, and then written about that so that we all have an easier time being human, right? So a great example of a dynamic four is Glennon Doyle Melton. She wrote the book Untamed, and the whole thing is like her living her life, writing about how it transformed her, and then through that she's able to give so many more people this freedom to think and change and be who they need to be in the world with more ease. So what our type fours need to pay attention to is, a lot of times our type fours can hold on to the negative feedback they receive and release the positive, right? Because they're kind of really focused on the significance idea. And so anything that seems average can be unwelcome for our fours. And so the focus of attention is so much on like, how can I be great, so that when they get the information that they're falling short in some way, it can feel like confirmation that they are missing something. A lot of times our type fours are looking for something outside of themselves that can make them feel complete. And so getting negative feedback is kind of like, yep, I knew it. I was missing something. I knew that I didn't have what I needed to be significant. And so instead, I encourage them to really focus on holding on to the positive too, because the positive can get kind of um, dismissed out of fear that it's inauthentic, or kind of an assumption that it's inauthentic. When I teach trainings in corporate environments, I say that you have to give positive feedback completely separate from negative feedback to our type fours. A common corporate strategy is to kind of Oreo your feedback. So it's like, I give a positive, I give a negative, I give a positive. So I sandwich it. And for our fours, you can't do that, because if you give a positive, a negative, and a positive, that negative is going to go straight into their psyche. It's going to go home with them. They're going to remember it 20 years later, but that positive feedback will not even get heard. And so you have to make sure that you're giving them separate so that they can trust the honest, good feedback that you give them. Second thing that pay attention to as a leader as a four is the desire to be immediately great. This fear that if you don't start out amazing, that you're not the right person for the job. So what that means is, if you write your first short story and it's not the best short story that's ever been written, if it doesn't inspire you, then there can be a feeling that you are not supposed to be a writer. And the reality, the thing I hope that our type fours can absorb is that greatness is made from incremental practice, not from birth. No one is born a great writer. No one is born a great student. No one is born a great leader. We become these things through incremental, kind of boring practice. Like we show up every day and we participate a little bit at a time, and that grows into greatness. But a lot of times our type fours have this such a high expectation of themselves that they're supposed to just go in and be amazing right out the gate. And when they're not, it's just kind of evidence and proof that they are not the kind of person who does blank, whatever it is that they intend to do. And I think that can happen, especially in the age of social media, where we're seeing the finished product of what people make, but we don't see the behind the scenes of all the boring tasks and the gruesome failures and all of the rejections. I think it's helpful for our fours to note that and to see that. Okay, so our burnout prevention for our fours is this idea that can happen is perfection is evidence that you don't have what you need. So a lot of our types we struggle with, every type can struggle with perfectionism in its own way and for different reasons. The special flavor of our type 4 perfectionism looks like I have to meet this standard, and if I don't meet that standard, then I don't have what it takes. And I need to get what it takes outside of me, and or maybe I'll never have it. And so that perfectionism as evidence that you don't have what you need is really an unfair way to grow into who you want to be in the world. Because what you're essentially saying is, I need to have been birthed an incredible writer or I will never write. And no one ever has been and likely never will be. Everybody has had to improve and practice, and they have editors and they have teams and they have people who tell them how to improve all the time. We just don't see that. And my husband's a type 4, and I think a good example of this with him, what that looks like, he loves to run, and he didn't run for a couple of years, and he went to go run again, and he immediately got shin splints. And he would keep going out, and he would keep pushing himself harder and harder, and he would like not listen to his body, like push himself way past his capacity, and he would continue to get hurt, and he would continue to have shin splints instead of resting and moderately improving. And once he finally like started moderate growth and incremental improvement, he felt like he could actually sustain this, and he runs every day now. But before he was able to do the incremental growth, he was just expecting himself to be able to immediately run a 5K and run the whole thing and not be in pain. And that's just that, it's that. And when he couldn't do that, he would come home and be like, I guess I'm not a runner. And it's like, and the reality is that he was trying to be something that he wasn't ready to be yet, because he hadn't built out that incremental growth. All right, type 5. I'm going to take a sip of water, y'all. So our type 5s are the investigator. Their basic desires to be capable, competent, and informed. Their basic fears of being helpless, useless, or overwhelmed. Type 5s are analytical, observant, and insightful. They're inquisitive, economical, studious, self-sufficient, and are likely the most informed person that you know. Leadership in type 5s. Type 5s are naturally going to be likely a really great example of what it means to be informed on their topic. A lot of type 5s become like the go-to expert in their field because their special form of perfectionism, again, is making sure that they know things inside and out. They want to know everything there is to know about their topic of interest. This doesn't mean that they only have one topic of interest, but they do typically have a few where they go very, very deep, and they don't tend to spread themselves too thin unless, again, maybe they're stressed out and they go to that 7 mode. That can happen. But in general, 5s tend to be just like zoning in, learning as much as they can about a given topic. Now, they need to pay attention to imposter syndrome. Our type 5s really struggle with imposter syndrome because there's this, and I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but there's this idea of a Dunning-Kruger effect, which is that the more you learn, like the more your information increases, the lower your confidence goes. So it's basically this idea that the more you learn, actually, the less confident you can be because the more there is to know. Like you start to learn how much more you need to learn. And so that can really happen for our type fives is they can get into this mode of feeling like there's just too much to learn and they're never going to feel qualified to actually create something out of that, to speak up as the expert. They might be in a room of people who know less than them about their topic and still not speak up out of fear that they'll get caught not knowing something. The second thing that can come up, and I say I want to make sure that I give the other side of that. What I want you to do for our type fives is to make sure that you're looking back just a few steps behind you. Like your job isn't to be the person who knows everything on a given topic because that's unrealistic, but it is to look back and say, well, how much more do I know? When I talk about coaching, I say go back 3 years. That's just enough back to where you're not in the same problems. You've gotten through the problems, but you can still remember the pain of not having the solutions that you have now. And it's like that. You want to look back and see how can I help you to get to where I am? And then as I continue to learn, the gauge will continue to move about who I'm helping to move forward in their information. So you're not looking to know everything, you're just looking for the people who know a little bit less than you do so that you can inform them. The next thing is not asking for support. So this idea for our type fives is I take care of me and you take care of you. And there's kind of a fear that people are going to invade their space or take too much from them. So they like to keep those lines very clear. But the problem with that is that that also limits their access to support. So not only are they, preventing themselves from being depleted, but they're also not getting the support that we all need from the people in our lives. And so when we step into a role of leadership, there's no leader who's doing it all on their own. But a lot of times our type fives believe that, they have to take care of themselves and that other people take care of themselves. And they don't necessarily see the opportunity for their own receiving of support. So burnout prevention for our type fives. Our type fives, again, there can be a focus on like the ever looming depletion that can occur. It's kind of like they feel like, okay, I get this cup of water every day, and every day, every time something happens, I just feel like it's going down and it's never going to get filled back up. But if we focus on what's going down, if we focus on what's missing, then we're only going to create more feelings of lack. So if we focus on kind of hoarding our energy, hoarding our resources so that we don't have to do without, then we start to actually see more of where our needs are. So a lot of times type fives who make it do really well financially never quite feel like they're doing well financially, and in fact can be more stressed and more worried about their resources than before they had money because they've learned to be so focused on what they're missing, and that can create some unnecessary stress in their life. And this can happen not just with like financial resources, but like energy resources. So your ability to believe that you have the time and the energy to do what you need to do. The more we focus on what we're missing, the more we're going to feel the effect of what's missing without actually being depleted. So it's like we can kind of create a burnout that didn't have to ever exist. All right, so our type sixes, the basic fear so type sixes are the loyalist. Sometimes they're called the loyal skeptic because there's kind of this duality there. The basic desire is to feel secure and supported. The basic fear is being left out on their own without support or guidance. Our type sixes are aware, loyal, and hardworking. They're prepared, community oriented, reliable, engaging, and likely some of the most courageous people you know. I specifically say some of the most courageous people you know because type sixes are kind of known for worst case scenario thinking. So, kind of focusing on what could go wrong. I don't really prefer that language, but that is kind of common Enneagram language. I much more prefer the language of they're constantly prepared. They like to know what could happen, they like to be prepared for that. And in that way, they step out into the world with much more awareness of what could occur that could be negative, and therefore they're stepping out with much more courage than me, who you'll learn about my type next, is a lot more focused on what's going to go right. And I don't have to be as brave to just step out into life. So that's there. And I want to touch on that loyal skeptic thing, because that duality I think is very important. I think type 6 is one of the more complex numbers on the Enneagram, because there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of contradictions. But one of those contradictions is type 6s are loyal to the people in their lives, but until you earn a place in their life, they often will keep you at arm's length and kind of be skeptical. So that loyal skeptic is kind of like that initial, like, what's your aim here? What's your goal? Can I trust you? And then once that trust is earned, there's a deep loyalty that can occur. Leadership in type 6s. Type 6s are a great example of follow through and commitment, right? Like, type 6s aren't afraid of the hard work. They're not afraid of consistency. They're going to stick through it into the end. So they're not going to just drop the ball on you. They're going to follow through and make sure things happen, and they happen with intention, and they happen well. Things to pay attention to as our 6s is, first of all, not seeing yourself as a leader. A lot of times our 6s can give their authority over to other people and want someone else to say, here's what your role is, follow through with that role, and then we'll be good. So I've had type 6s say to me, I don't want to be the boss, I just want to hire the boss. So there's this desire to be the tester and to make sure that, like, the person who's in charge is qualified, but they may not want to step into that role to be the leader, because that does feel like it can feel like you are stepping out without support and without guidance, which can be a bit scary. But knowing that you are capable to do that is one of the lessons for our type 6s to learn. And the second piece of that kind of piggybacks on that, which is trusting your instincts. So make sure that you do trust your own gut, you trust your instincts. You are more aware than you realize you are. A lot of times what can happen for our 6s, especially when they step into a role of leadership, is they can start to second guess their decisions, and they might go to a lot of different people for feedback. So if I'm trying to make a decision and I go to 5 different people, those 5 people are going to give me 5 different answers, and I'm still going to be stuck on a decision, right? So what we have to do is we have to really limit the amount of people who give us feedback, and we have to learn to trust our own instincts so that we're really following through with the decisions that we make, and we know that we can relax into actually making a decision. And burnout prevention for our 6s, the number one phrase that gets said to me by 6s at every speaking engagement that I do is, I'm trying to make this decision, but I'm so scared of letting blank down. I'm so scared of letting my boss down. I'm so scared of letting my mom down. I'm so scared of letting my, you know, whoever down, the people in our lives. We're so scared of letting people down. So that is like a big thing for the world of 6s. And when it comes to burnout prevention and recovery, and we're thinking about, stepping into healthy leadership, you want to make sure that you are regularly setting the boundaries that you need to set to play the roles that you play in your life. So if you're going to be a great daughter or son, if you're going to be a great leader in your life, you're going to have to set boundaries along the way so that you aren't letting them down, but you're also not letting yourself down, so that you can sustain the amount of work that you want to do. And yeah, and I think setting your intentions ahead of time. So let's say you're stepping into a new semester, saying, what is my intention for the semester? What are my priorities here? And then how can I set the appropriate boundaries to make sure that those priorities take precedent? All right, I'm gonna take another sip of water, and we're gonna talk about type 7. All right, type 7. The basic desire here is to remain happy, satisfied, and fulfilled. The basic fears of being deprived and trapped in negative emotions. The titles that we give to our 7s are this is mine, the enthusiast is like the number one for type 7s. I titled them in my book, The Illuminators of Possibility, because there's kind of this full-on belief that everything is going to work out great. Type sevens are cheerful, they're fun loving, they're adventurous, they're curious, bold, fast learners, they're joyful, and often somewhat of a Renaissance person. So the title enthusiast speaks to this desire to do a lot of things. And so type sevens can be like a jack of all trades, master of none, like do spread themselves really thin. If they're not careful, they may not go as deep as they need to go in the topics of their interest. So leadership in type sevens, where they like naturally thrive, type sevens can be an example of a life well lived. Most type sevens aren't going to settle for anything less than a remarkable life. There's kind of this motor underneath the surface that's always aware of how much more they could be getting out of life. You know what, the getting all of the juice that life has to offer. Like they just want to do everything. They want to experience the world in its fullness. And when things don't feel good, they always believe there's a way for them to feel better. So type sevens naturally give us this belief that like life is good and can be lived well, and we don't have to settle. The other thing that our sevens can bring to the table is belief in possibility, right? This illumination of possibility, this idea that, yes, things will work out for the best. Things are going to be okay. Full on optimism, like things are going to be great. Things to pay attention to for our sevens is saying yes is very easy for most type sevens. But what's also very easy for most type sevens before they really get into the work of the Enneagram is saying, actually, never mind, right? Because sevens don't mind making plans. They just don't necessarily feel obligated to follow through with them. And so a lot of the work for our type sevens, especially when you step into leadership, is let your yes be yes and your no be no. So maybe you need to say, let me think about that. I'm gonna, I'm going to really sit on that for a second and then I'll get back to you, because the immediate gratification of a yes is so fun and so nice, but it's not always true, right? So we want to make sure that we actually, when we say yes, we actually mean yes. The second thing is building a tolerance for boredom and releasing FOMO, like fear of missing out, letting that go. So one of the things, I'm a type 7, and in college, if I could tell you how many times I pulled an all-nighter for no reason, just because I was scared that someone would do something fun while I was sleeping. Like that is kind of the level of like FOMO that I felt as a 7 in college. Like everything's happening. If I found out anyone was doing any all-nighters, like I had to be there because I didn't want to sleep through the fun. And I think it's kind of obvious why that doesn't work out, right? Like we lose sleep. Sleep's pretty integral to our survival as our species. So yeah, build a tolerance for boredom. And most type sevens who haven't built the tolerance for boredom, when I say this, there's kind of like a no, thank you, I don't want to do that. And so what's really helpful is meditation can really create a lot of spaciousness. And as a 7 myself, I will say walking meditations were the first way that I had to do it. I couldn't just sit still and meditate. I had to do walking meditations first and then kind of grow into the stillness. Now, burnout prevention for our sevens is intentional limitations can actually benefit you greatly. So, sevens hate being limited. They hate limitations, they hate restrictions. But when you intentionally implement limitations, it can help you to do way more with your life. So, an example of this is, a lot of type 7s are vegetarians or minimalists, because once you start to limit your options, you start to see how many more options are within those limitations. So an example for me is I kind of segment my work days. So every Monday is my admin day, every Tuesday is my Enneagram day, and this helps me to really go in and focus on just what the thing is that I need to work on that day. And so then I can go way deeper in the areas in which I work if I can segment and limit my space. So it's I'm not going to work on anything else. I'm just going to focus on this thing for this period of time. Sevens, you will find that you can get so much more done when you intentionally limit your options. All right, type 8. So type 8s are the challenger on the Enneagram. The basic desire is to determine their own path in life. The basic fears of being harmed or controlled by others. Type 8s are strong, charismatic leaders. They're bold, independent, They're honest, they're magnanimous, and likely the person who has continuously pushed you to be more thoughtful, egalitarian, and driven in your own life. Leadership in type 8s comes kind of naturally. Like the very traditional understanding of what a leader is. I hope that you've seen through our talk these 9 distinct variations of what a leader can be, that we're all leaders in our life. They just have these unique flavors in which we're qualified innately to lead. But the more like traditional sense, like the person you're going to ask to cut the turkey at Thanksgiving, those are our 8s. Like they kind of step into a space, they command a room, they take up the space in the room, and they don't mind stepping into the role of leader. But I think like they are an example for us innately as a symbol of self-trust and that commanding a room and trusting your instincts. I think it's really inspiring the way that type 8s really just believe that they're competent and they're capable and they can conquer whatever it is that comes their way. Things to pay attention to for our type 8s is a lot of time our type 8s in leadership especially, they will communicate very directly, very bluntly. And we've talked about before, like I'm in these corporate environments sometimes, and I'll have to say to leaders of type 8s, when you're giving them feedback, you need to be blunt. You need to be direct, be to the point, don't sugarcoat it. They want to know that you're being upfront and honest with them. And because that's how they like to receive feedback, they tend to give feedback that way. They tend to be direct, upfront, quick with the feedback, and they don't always know. So one of the things to absorb as an 8 is that other people might need you to soften the edges a little bit and to kind of do that Oreo for them, sugarcoat it a little bit, make them feel a little bit nice about it, because it can be really abrupt to receive blunt feedback if that's not your comfort zone. The second thing to know is that sometimes your inner experience may not match your external presentation. So most of our type 8s, and you might not want me to say this in front of your friends and your peers, but a lot of times our type 8s are like little gooey teddy bears inside. Like they're sweet and vulnerable and loving and they give so much, but they are very guarded up. And so sometimes our type 8s, they think like everyone knows I'm like sweet and loving and kind. But sometimes that external expression can be so guarded that it can come off as like tough and abrupt and direct and like you're not vulnerable. And so when people kind of talk to you like, well, you're a little aggressive, you're assertive, there's it can feel like a disconnect, right? Like if I feel really ooey gooey and lovey, so why are you experiencing me like that? So just know you might present a little bit tougher, a little bit harsher than you feel like you're being or you feel inside. Now, the burnout prevention here for our type 8s is to make sure to rest or to ask for help when overworked instead of powering up. So, the first response when things get hard for most type 8s, when they feel like they're at the bottom of their resources, they have nothing left to give, the first response is usually, well, I'm going to need to power up. I'm going to need to push through. I'm going to have to get stronger. And that actually, is kind of traditional burnout, right? Like we're getting into the zone of actually overdoing, overworking, and limiting your access to nourishment. And so what you need to do instead is to learn to ask for support and or take the rest that you need. Know that things are going to be okay if you take a break and you come back. You don't have to push through it right now, because efficiency can be really important to our type 8s. And so it can feel like everything needs to happen right now. And if you can step back and pause, you can really release that sense of urgency and see what's actually available to you in terms of personal resource. Okay, we're going to get into type 9. That's our last type, and then we're going to go into questions. So our type 9s, they're the peacemaker. The basic desire here is to maintain their peace of mind. The basic fear is creating rifts with the people in their life that cannot be repaired. Type 9s are empathetic, easygoing, and peaceful. They're conscientious, adaptable, and likely the most likable person that you know. Leadership in type 9. So type 9s naturally are typically the kind of leader that can serve as an example of making everyone feel welcome and safe. So the idea is, like, typically our type 9s kind of orient in the world with the awareness of how they're taking up space impacts other people's ability to take up space. So if a type 9 feels, if I have a strong opinion, then it can make you feel like you can't have a strong opinion. And so they will kind of manipulate themselves, make themselves smaller or quieter so that other people get to shine and other people get to be heard and feel comfortable. This is an amazing quality in a leader because you typically have kind of an environment where everyone's voice matters. Everyone feels like they're going to get heard. No one feels judged. The only thing that can happen, the things to pay attention to, is not commanding the tone of the space. So type 9s, you have to be the tone setter, right? If you're stepping into a leadership role, you want to make sure that you're setting the tone, and that may be a non-judgmental tone. But if you're not willing to step up and make someone uncomfortable, then that person, whoever is most willing to do that, who's most willing to make other people uncomfortable, will set the tone. And so you have to make sure to take practice that confidence in making that person uncomfortable so that everyone else can be safe. And the second is saying yes is a way to keep the peace. So a big work here for our 9s is you want to make sure that you're peacemakers, right? Not peacekeepers. So type 9s who are peacekeepers, they stay silent. They make themselves small. They kind of don't interject. They don't speak up. They don't say strong opinions. Peacemakers, they speak up for the things that matter to them. They speak up to create more peace in an environment, versus stepping back so that they can be at peace, so they don't have to be in the midst of the conflict. So what can happen sometimes for our 9s, especially 9s who are stepping into a leadership role, is that because they don't want to create rifts, they don't want to create tension, they say yes when asked to do just about anything. And so 9s end up being like really, really busy in their life and having way too many commitments. And actually sometimes like in the middle of everybody else's drama and problems, because they just won't say no. They won't set the boundaries that they need to set to actually create peace, not just keep peace. And the burnout prevention here for our 9s is know your priorities, similar to the 6s. Know what it is, your top 3 priorities for a given season. What do you really want to make sure you're focusing on? And then set boundaries according to those. So make sure that you are setting the boundaries necessary to preserve those priorities. All right. And again, my book is The Honest Enneagram. It's out online. So if you guys want to go even more deep with this, then that's where to find it. It's got all of the things we talked about at the beginning, the lines, the stress, the wings, all of that's broken down in there as well. But now let's answer some questions.
Yeah, so if you have questions, you can send them in the Q&A button there, and we can answer them there. I know we have a question here that is, how would a type 2 go about leading and taking charge of a group of people? How does a type 2 draw the line between being a helpful and giving leader versus being a doormat to those you're trying to serve?
So the answer to this is a little bit, it's deep. So you first have to start with learning and releasing the idea that love is to be earned, that you can be liked because of what you do and loved because of what you do, because that's an illusion, right? The very idea that we can earn love or earn likability is an illusion. Most people, they're going to love you or like you already. That's like set in stone. Like you can't earn that from someone. So it's important to release that, because if you step into a leadership role with the intention of getting likes and earning love, then that's how you're going to kind of take on that role of please like me, please love me. What if I do this for you? Then you'll love me. But if you come in so loved already by yourself, and that's what we talked about, that need, when I said like get in touch with yourself every single day, like what does your heart, mind, body, soul need, and then meet that need yourself. That's creating this like dynamic relationship to self-love, so that you aren't having to grab that from any outside resource, and you come in with that air of confidence, with that connection, because no matter how they choose to respond to you, like you and you are okay.
Okay, so we have another question here. My Enneagram showed that I am a type 4 and it was connected to 1 and 2 on the wheel. What does that mean?
Yeah. So, okay. So those are your stress and your rest lines. So for type 4, what that looks like when you feel safe, when you feel relaxed, when you feel at ease, when you're doing well, you might show up as a type 1. So you might have a little bit more like structure, a little bit more discipline. You might be more focused on like right and wrong. Then when you're stressed out and things aren't really going well or you're having a hard time, you might show up as a type 2, which can look a bit like trying to earn love, trying to people please, or find your acceptance outside of yourself.
Okay. I have a question that is from Faith, and Faith Williams is actually the one that pointed us to you
Oh,
directly
thanks,
from the
babe.
beginning. So, how would you recommend all different types be mindful of their differences and work together in a productive way?
hmm So I think, the first thing to know is one, that we aren't our Enneagram type, right? We have this type. And like I said in the beginning, it's what we think we have to be in order to be loved, accepted, okay, successful, all the like, things we want in life. We've developed a very special way to earn those things. So, first of all, own that for yourself. So, start with the process of what does this look like for me? And how does this showing up in my life, and how can I release this expectation that I earn whatever good thing I want in my life through this worldview. And then start to think about how other people are doing the same thing, right? Start to think about, okay, so someone came that gave me really direct, really blunt feedback that hurt my feelings, but I also know that they're trying to earn their way of being by being direct and being upfront, being as bold as possible. And so it's actually not about me at all. And it's actually just their process with their own life and their own ego. And I'm dealing in the way it hurt my feelings is my process with my own ego. So really separating ourselves from these behavior patterns and recognizing that they're this really creative way in which we've learned to get what we want out of life.
Okay.
That's the simplest way I can answer it. But
So here's one. How would you suggest we start using the Enneagram for our own development?
hmm So I really think the first thing to learn is to take your number and to notice the high and low levels of health. So that's going to be in my book. That's also on enneagraminstitute.com. It might be in your reports that you got from if you took the assessment. I believe it is, but start there, because here the interesting thing is that sometimes because it's our worldview, it's what we've become, it's what we think is right. So as a type 7, I've like positive thinking is like the way of life, and so it's actually the opposite, right? Like my work is letting myself feel the negative emotions, letting myself dive into the depths. But my whole life I've lived with this moral compass of like positivity is like the answer, it's the way to be. And most of us are going to be like that. We're going to think that what is good is this natural worldview that we've had. And so focus on the levels of health, because what is healthy for you might look very different than what is healthy for me. And so that can give you some information.
Okay, here's a good one. Do you think that people have different Enneagrams for different situations, such as work, home, with friends, etc.?
So there's a lot of fun ways in which the Enneagram moves around. So like we talked about that stress and rest line, you might pull in qualities from one of those types. So one of my favorite teachers, his name is Peter O'Hanrahan, and he's been doing this for like 30 years. And he talks about the stress line. Like if you try to live out of that state, it can be really stressful for you. And a lot of us try to live out of our stress state at work. So a lot of 6s try to live out of the 3 space. So a lot of 7s try to live out of the 1 space, and it creates a little bit more tension that is necessary. So that's one way we might show up as a different type. We might use our wings, and there are these fun things called overlays. which is like a whole other thing, but it's fun. Where you might have another number that kind of you can look like at times because of the environment that you're in. So your company might have a culture that is an Enneagram type. You might have like a very Enneagram 3 company, and so you might put on the mask of what a 3 would do as a way to fit into the company.
Okay. I'm trying to kind of like clump a few together here, but there's a question about, is it normal for your Enneagram type to shift as you move through seasons of life?
So your type stays the same your whole life. So because again, it is your worldview, it's kind of the lens you see the world through, that stays the same. But you are likely, most of us, in our early 20s, we are like kind of the purest form of our number in that stage of our life. But as we start to like change and grow, and I would imagine like our younger generation might start this journey sooner just because of the younger people that I know. I think they started the self-growth journey much younger than I did. Um, that can start to change even before you find the Enneagram. As you do personal development, your number can start to soften and you can start to become healthier, and it might be less obvious. And again, that stress number, that rest number, and the wings, you might pull one in for a season of time where you look more like one or the other.
So there's a couple of questions that are kind of asking for more clarification about the Enneagram. And so can you share a little bit about like what the wings and growth, stress, and the triads, what are those things?
Yeah, so there's so many elements of the Enneagram. So I will, again, I'll try and do it for you guys here, but I encourage you to like read a little bit more on it because I love it. So obviously I want you guys to love it too. But the first thing, you have the circle, right, where you have all the types. Each number on either side of you are your wings. You can have access to one or both wings. You might not access either of those wings. The goal is to balance those wings out. You can think of it as each of the numbers on either side of you offer you skills that can benefit you positively. So if you can intentionally pull those in, they can really round you out. So let's think about type 9, who struggles the most with self-expression in terms of personal opinion. They're surrounded by two of the most opinionated numbers on the Enneagram, right? Like type 8 is like one of the most direct and honest. Type 1 is one of the most with the strongest personal convictions. So if you can pull those in, that can really benefit you in your number. So that's the wings. And then there's subtypes. So there's every single Enneagram has 3 subtypes. That's one-to-one, social, and self-preservation. These are we all have all 3 of them, but there's usually one for each of us that's dominant, one that's repressed, and one that's secondary. And these are going to impact the way your type shows up as well. It can go so in depth as there are things called counter types. So if you relate to the motivation of your number, but the behaviors of another number, you could be a counter type. So that means that your type shows up a little bit different based off of how you've learned to survive. So an example of this, I'm a 7, but I'm a social 7. So because 7s like to get their needs met, like to just like get what they want when they want it. As a social 7, because I've learned that I want to fit into my social network, that's my survival mechanism. I know that's not very likable, and so I've learned to look a little bit like a 1 or look a little bit like a 2 as a way to meet that survival instinct. So those are subtypes. And then there's triads, which is the idea that there's a heart center, a body center, and a head center. So types 2, 3, and 4 are in the heart center. Types 5, 6, and 7 are in the head center. And types 8, 9, and 1 are in the body center. And this just means that if you're in the body center, you have quick access to anger. In the heart center, you have quick access to maybe like shame. And then if you're in the head center, you have quick access to anxiety. And this is important to know because when you go to do work of the Enneagram, you can go to balancing out those 3 centers is really good work. So if as a head type, I have to really work on connecting to my heart center because that can help me to kind of fast track some of that personal growth work. So there's these 3 centers, and the idea of triads is that you have a dominant type in each center. So maybe you're a dominant type one, and then you have a dominant type in the heart center and a dominant type in the head center as well. This is kind of a contested theory because some people believe that it's the only way to Enneagram because it adds so much nuance, and other people believe that it's just too confusing and can actually prevent you from doing the work of the Enneagram. Like if we're spreading ourselves that thin, it can be hard to really see transformation.
Okay, so maybe one or two more questions depending on the time here. We have a lot of questions, so there are a lot out there. But here's one that, as the father of two teenagers, when do you think we should encourage them to begin to explore and type themselves?
First of all, I appreciate you saying type themselves because only they know their type. As much as I think I know my kid, he knows himself way better than I could ever know him. And I will tell you, as a parent, not as an Enneagram teacher, like what my philosophy is. I have a stepson and he is 8 years old and he tells me what he is all the time. So he knows what the Enneagram is, he knows what it's about, and he tells me what he is. So right now he says he's a type 1. Um, and that to me tells me what he thinks is important right now. So right now he's like, it's important to me that I'm a good person. And that's what I need to know about him, right? Like that's more valuable than me knowing him as a number, is me knowing how he's seeing himself in this season of his life. And so start the conversation. As long as you're not prescribing anything to him or them, like there's no harm in listening, because as I know as a kid, like you just want people to want to know you. And I think that's a really great gift we can give our children, is a listening ear.
Okay, so the last question here, there's a couple of questions that I'm kind of mixing here, but there's questions about the idea and concept of being mistyped. So
Mm-hmm.
do you have thoughts on the common mistyped numbers? How do you figure that out? And what do you do if you feel like you've been mistyped?
I'm glad you asked, or y'all asked. So being a mistyped is relatively common, especially if you have a really strong cultural connection. So sometimes when we have a strong family culture, or we're really ingrained in the culture of our society, it's really easy to be mistyped. So really focus in back on those motivations, those basic fears, and which one resonates to you the most is the one for you. And if you have like 2 or 3 that resonate, I say pit them against each other and make them compete. So if you think you're a 7 and a 1, ask yourself, would I rather be a good person or would I rather be free? And it might be uncomfortable, it might make you feel embarrassed, but be honest about which one you would rather be, and that's going to give you your answer. The other thing is that there are no bad Enneagram types. I think sometimes we read our description and we don't like it and we don't want to be it. And so just know that everybody feels that way a little bit. Like it feels embarrassing and like no, I don't want anybody to know this about me, like this is uncomfortable. And so really hold on to the fact that there is like no bad number. We all are like good and bad and in between. It's just part of it.
Well, thank you very much for answering some questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to everybody's questions, but Sarajane, I think this was great. I felt called out and developed at the same time, so that's a great way to be. I will say that Sarajane has been gracious enough to allow us to record this, so the recording will be available later for some of you, because I know some people were asking about that. So we'll make that available. And we also have a lot of work that we do in the Office of Leadership and Community Engagement for you all that are watching, related to the Enneagram, and we have a whole host of other leadership assessments and work that we do. So feel free to reach out to us. You can shoot us an email at leader@georgiasouthern.edu, and we can get in kind of contact about what we can do with that. I know Sarajane has some great resources that she mentioned as well with her book and other aspects. So feel free to check those out online. And thank you again, Sarajane, for joining us tonight. It was a great, this was kind of an experiment for us as well, but thank you very much for joining us. For all of you out there, I hope you have a great evening, and we will hopefully see you face to face soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye.